Good afternoon, colleagues. You're very welcome to our webinar this afternoon with a particular focus on outdoor learning and religious and moral education. We're really delighted that at the end of a busy day, you've been able to join us this afternoon. We're joined today by Jo Walker, Senior Education Officer for RME Philosophies, and I'm sure lots of other things which Jo will be able to explain to us shortly. Also by Ian Menzies and Jen Hodson from the Improving Gender Balance and Equalities team. My name's Mary Thompson, and I'm really thrilled that you've been able to join us this afternoon. I hope you've had a chance to have a wee look at the protocols. If you're able to find the screen that says Peace Rocks My World, that is Jen's other half. And if you can find that and just pin that to the screen, it'll make the presentation really nice and large within the centre of your screen at the moment. We're hoping that this afternoon we'll have lots of opportunities for discussion, so feel free to add your kind of comments, thoughts, questions or wonderings into the chat pane, and we'll do our very best to kind of respond to them. And also in Google Meet we really nicely have the raise my hand function, which means we can bring people into the conversation, and I'll do that on behalf of Jo and all the callers on all the folk on the call this afternoon. Jen, if you're able to move on to the slide, that would be really appreciated, and we'll kick off with Jo.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Add my welcome to Mary's. I'm Jo Walker, Senior Education Officer, and I have responsibility, as Mary says, for RME, but also added to that, religious education in Roman Catholic schools, psychology, philosophy, sociology, and religious observance. I've been come from a secondary background rather than a primary, and I've been around for quite a long time. And I do have some background too in environmental science. So, you know, environmental issues, outdoor learning and RME has always been something that's been an interest to me. And I think it's really important to make sure that we make as many links as we can with RME, and make sure that, you know, we try to move it out of the box that I think sometimes it can be in. So really the purpose of today is to do what we would do in a classroom, I suppose, and that is to question, to discuss, and to think. And you know, hopefully, I suppose we've not got any learning intentions up for you here today, but my learning intention would certainly be that, you know, you would go away from this event and you'd be thinking, oh, I never thought about that way, I could try that, or whatever. So it's just about getting you to think maybe a little differently about how we relate RME to outdoor learning. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, Mary, over to you.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So folks, if you've just joined us, the session is being recorded this afternoon, and we'll share any kind of feedback or links that are posted into the chat with you. So I suppose just before we kind of kick off with the current picture, it'd be really great to have the spirit of participation. So can I ask you just to kind of type your reaction when you hear outdoor learning? What does that make you feel? If you could take a wee moment and type that into the chat pane, that would be really great, just to see where people are at with outdoor learning at the moment. And I'll pause for a wee minute while folks hopefully can type into the chat pane. Oh, some lovely words coming through. Hooray, why indoors? Love it, Juliet. Great, excited. Oh, really nice words there too. Cross-curricular, inclusive, ignites curiosity. Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. So really lovely to see that. That's how you're feeling already. And again, outdoor learning, endless possibilities. Love it. That sounds great. Some really nice kind of words coming through there. Exploration develops creativity. Yeah, there's just so many possibilities about what we can do with outdoor learning and learning outdoors. And I think particularly the experience of lockdown that we've all had earlier in the session, earlier this year in 2020, and some of us are continuing with in Tier 4 at the moment. We know that outdoor learning has really kind of sharpened, and COVID has really sharpened the focus and the need for working outdoors, for learning outdoors, and just outdoor learning altogether. Yep, enthused, curious, refreshed. That's a really lovely word too, as well. A refreshed focus, perhaps, on outdoor learning. And we're really fortunate within Scotland to have a curriculum for excellence, which recognises the importance of outdoor learning across the 4 contexts for learning and across the experiences and outcomes. And we know that learning can take place anywhere, inside, outside, wherever we can. It's about following children's interests and about taking that learning wherever we can. I wanted to pop into the chat, in actual fact, not realising that Juliet was on the call today. Actually, Juliet has written a really lovely and thought-provoking blog round about learning indoors, learning outdoors, and I would recommend that it's worth a read, and it's really thought-provoking, and actually maybe Juliet might say something about that later on. So at the current time, outdoor learning has never been more important, and in actual fact, the Scottish Government are recognising that, and we've recently put together with SAPO have put together a free 2-hour online professional learning module. I don't know if people have managed to see that, but we'd really recommend it, and we'll provide the link to that for you later. If you haven't looked at it, it's certainly worth a look. And actually also recognising the support for outdoor learning as well. The Scottish Government announced that 2 million funding package for outdoor learning education centres, and that's really, really welcome, I'm sure, for the sector too. If you are working in a local authority, it's really beneficial for folks to know who their SAPO link is, and that's the Scottish Advisory Panel for Outdoor Education, and I've popped that link into the chat there for you, and that they're really good folks to be able to advise you on procedures and protocols in your area, particularly at this time with coronavirus. If you're able to move on to the next slide for us, Jen, that would be really appreciated. And we've got Carolyn on the call here. In actual fact, last week we had a call from Natalie White from East Ayrshire Council, and she was talking round about why learn outdoors. And this is actually an extract that's also in that SAPO module that I mentioned momentarily ago. And if you want to click on the link at a later date, there's a link from Natalie who's speaking through why outdoors, what are some of the benefits of doing that, and it's kind of categorized there under Mrs. Na and then some other aspects as well. So really, learning outdoors, it's so beneficial for ourselves as practitioners, and it's so beneficial for our children and our young people across Scotland. Jen, if you're able to move on again, that would be grand. So we have a really nice place, depending on where we are, how confident we feel as practitioners with outdoor learning. It might be that we're really far down the road, and obviously some of the possibilities that we've seen and some of the kind of positivity, that words that have come through the chat already might indicate that. We're not all in the same place, and we recognise there's a need for folks getting started and how they can begin to take learning outdoors. And that first poster there from SAPO and Lost is about small steps, some really practical advice that we can take forward with our learners about how we can introduce the outside inside, or we can meet pupils outside before or after a break, and just really be kind of flexible to the opportunities that arise for us. And a really nice article there, some top tips from Rob Bushby, who has spoken specifically around why outdoor learning in this recovery phase. So yeah, outdoor learning is really important for us, for our children, for our mental health and well-being, and it goes much broader than that. So I would encourage us to think about and to explore some of that a little bit further. And I see that Ian's helpfully popped in that link for the professional learning opportunities that we have there. So hand back over to Joe, and if we can move on, Jan, that would be really appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Marie. Interestingly enough, as Marie says, you've got a couple of pictures that are coming up here, 3 pictures in fact, all of which are less than 2 minutes walk from my front door. And why I mention that is because I didn't actually know that these areas existed before lockdown. I'm sure that there's other people in a similar kind of situation. I've lived here for 8 years, but my world has been my home, my office, and various other places in the town, and things that right on my doorstep I hadn't noticed were actually there. So I'm going to start by just getting you just to imagine, just to think, and you probably have some experience to draw upon around this, but imagine a space that you like, an outdoor space that you like, a space that you would be happy to take learners to. Could be part of your school grounds, could be a local park, could be some other green space. With that in mind, have a look at this slide and have a wee think about what kinds of conversations do you think your learners could have as they're outdoors? What kind of questions might they ask you? What kind of questions might they ask each other? What kind of observations might they make when they're out? So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to put anything into the chat pane there you think might answer those. So if you were leading that group of learners through this, would Jen, if you move on to the next slide, there it is. It's a path, tree covered. Actually, now I was there earlier on today, and the leaf cover is an awful lot less than it was, and it means that you can see things that you hadn't seen before. But what kind of questions would your learners be coming up with? What kind of things might they ask you? What kind of things might they ask each other? And linking that, just think about, let's say you had been recently exploring RME experiences and outcomes in your learning context. How do you think you might make some links between what your children have been learning in RME and the outdoor experience they're now having? So anything you want to put into the chat pane there. Katrina, you've got a fungi hunt. Yes, we saw some fantastic mushrooms earlier today. Be very careful with that one, obviously. Lee has got who created the paths. That's an interesting one. What animals live here? What lives here? Who does this belong to? Where are we going? Yes, I like that one. Are we nearly there yet? Reminds me of an episode of The Simpsons. How long have the trees been there? Have they been there before my parents were born? Yes, that's an interesting one about that kind of historical link to the past, and also, I guess, the issue of preservation of the natural world. Who's looking after this? Where do the colours come from? Sunlight, how does it make you feel to be here? Yeah, okay, move on to the next slide, please, Jen. And again, just a few minutes from my house, and I hadn't even known it existed. And it's beautifully quiet, quite reflective place. A whole load of questions coming up there. Why did the leaves turn brown in autumn? Who made these trees? It's quite interesting looking at these questions that you're raising. Some of these, well, I would say all of these questions could be, I suppose, classed as interdisciplinary questions, because some of them are very much about history, some of them are about scientific aspects of what they're seeing, others are more affective domain. So for me, and Mary's already mentioned that, when we're taking learning outdoors, I think you're opening up a huge range of possibilities for interdisciplinary learning and looking at things in a much more interdisciplinary way. And earlier on in the chat pane, a lot of you had said things about curiosity and creativity, and Ian, physical journey versus spiritual journey. Now, there's an interesting question and an interesting observation, even to discuss the question of this, the word spiritual. What does the word spiritual mean? How might that be accessed by learners? What does it mean to them? What's their experience of it? Fantastic questioning. So that's the kind of thing. You're out with your learners, prompting these questions. You might not be able to answer them all, but of course that's the whole spirit of creativity. It's that curiosity. It's that asking questions. It's that challenging themselves to think about things in a different way. Okay, Jen, if you move on to the next slide, please. I'm conscious that some of the slides you're about to see now are quite wordy. I don't think there's a problem there because obviously this has been recorded. You can go back, you can use those in your own time. But I've produced a series of prompts here to I suppose, provide a wee bit of direction about how it might support your thinking around the links between RME and outdoor learning. I'm going to ask you again, just in the chat pane, are there any questions here that particularly jump out at you as particularly relevant for you? Are there any questions here that are particularly relevant for your learners, for the learning context that you're in? And if you want to pop your thoughts into the chat pane, or alternatively, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll get you actually to share your thoughts with us. So I'll give you a minute or two just to have a look through those.
Thanks, Juliet, for popping a kind of comment into the chat pane there. Really nice to see. I suppose, Joe's, I'm waiting for folks to kind of type in. I think that one of the bullet points that jumps out at me is probably the third from the bottom.
Yep.
In RME, you may have thought about things like fairness, kindness, compassion, equality, love. Does being outdoors make you think of any of these things? Yeah, I think that's a really nice question.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. You know, I guess different levels throughout curriculum for excellence. You know, compassion is one that always jumps out at me because it's one of those things that I think, if you like, crosses all religious beliefs and perspectives as well as non-religious beliefs and perspectives. So how would we demonstrate compassion towards the natural world? Do we demonstrate compassion? What are the kind of things that learners could do to demonstrate compassion? What kind of things might they see outdoors that actually might look as if people are not being terribly compassionate towards the natural world? Yeah, Katrina, you've got the importance of looking after the planet. Caretakers, and you're right, absolutely. And I'll come to that just a wee while. That whole concept of stewardship, responsibility for the created world, if that's how you think it came about. First question, Kirsty, about inner city school. Yeah, what's different about being outdoors? What does it make you think? Julia, fantastic comment there about pilgrimage and journeys. There was up on the hub at one point, I don't know if it's still there, I will check, the Nesting Primary, which is in Shetland, did some fantastic work on labyrinths and creating labyrinths out in the school grounds. Obviously, quite a rural setting there, but the kind of things, I suppose, Kirsty, that could also be applicable in an inner city school. Carolyn, who looks after who uses the spaces and what impact do your actions have on the outdoors. And Lee, you've got curiosity about how this came to be. I think, again, it's fantastic way to have that engagement and that discussion with young people. How did this, you know, part of the natural world come to be? How should we treat it? In what ways can we demonstrate compassion and respect and kindness and fairness and so on? So fantastic statements there, fantastic comments. This kind of thing I think you go back, have a look at, think about in your own learning context, how would you actually potentially address some of these questions? So, Jen, if you can move on to the next slide, please. Now, again, this is a very, very wordy slide, and apologies for that. But again, I thought it'd be useful to provide you with some detail so that you can explore at your leisure after this event. It might prompt questions from you, it might suggest approaches, and if you'd like to talk these through with either Mary or myself, then all of our contact details will be available at the end of the presentation. What I've done is I've taken the outcomes and experiences, and I've now kind of categorized them. And you will know that when we moved to benchmarks, we moved very much away, if you like, from Christianity, world religions selected for study, and the development of beliefs and values to beliefs, values, and issues, practices, and traditions. So we've kind of made those a little bit more explicit so that we're kind of focusing on those, I think, key aspects of religious and, again, non-religious belief. So this particular slide is looking at second level, and it's focusing on beliefs. Again, do any of the suggested questions and learning approaches jump out at you as being things you hadn't thought of previously? Or are there things there that you think, I'd like to think a wee bit further about, I'd like a wee bit more explanation on that? And again, if you can put your ideas in the chat pane, or please feel free to raise your hand and put your comments in person at this point. Again, I'll give you some time just to digest that a wee bit. Yeah, and Maddie's pointing out we've got a first level and a third level example just coming up in a wee minute.
Joe, I wonder if we might explore one of them in particular.
Yeah.
What about kind of love one another, I suppose, as an example?
Yeah, well, one of the ones I thought, I mean, obviously there may well be some terms in there that folks are more familiar with than others. There was one that I thought would be particularly interesting, and that's the one which is on Dasvand, which is a concept in Sikhism, and it's a concept of being living a life that is in service of others. And again, most religions have something very similar along the perspective of giving your time, giving some of your money, giving some of your talents and gifts to help out other people. In terms of outdoor learning, how might learners be encouraged to carry out acts of service, if you like, for the outdoor world? What could they do, if they're learning outdoors and they're experiencing nature? What kind of things, as you say, when we're talking about those questions that they might raise, what kind of things might prompt them to think, well, how can I help nature? What could I do in my own life to support nature? So, for example, your learners are walking outdoors and they're spotting some litter. What questions about environmental responsibility might this raise? How might they link this to those religious ideas that have been mentioned in the chat pane already around stewardship and who owns the natural world? Where did it come from? And how should we look after it? So certainly that's one that I would kind of home in on. Joanne, you've got links to climate change and environmental issues. Yeah, it's one of those things I think we've always tried to stress, and I'm sure Ian, who's on the call today, from that science perspective, would agree that our response to the natural world is as much about our beliefs and values as it is about our understanding of nature as well and how it operates. So all of these things are inextricably linked. Katrina, you've got focus on aspects of nature and specific people in the Bible. For example, David was a shepherd. Yeah, that would be very, very good links, I think, with stories there, and I think we'll come back to that one in a wee minute. Okay, I think, Jen, if we move on to the next slide. So, this particular slide homes in on first level and looks at values. And again, very often the link between beliefs and values is quite a subtle one. But my view has always been that your values depend on your beliefs, and it's the beliefs into action is how you express those in terms of your values. But it's not a clear-cut issue by any stretch of the imagination. So again, anything there leap out at you? Anything you would like to know more about? Anything you think I hadn't thought about it that way? Kirsty, you got some vandalised or bleak areas of outdoors. Yep, impacting on others' well-being. Yeah, I think that's back to that question about preserving and who's looking after nature as well. And I think we're finding out at the moment, more than anything, that the outdoors is something that's hugely beneficial for our health and well-being. Juliet, do you want to come in and say a little bit about the research?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. This was just something that popped into my head as we're talking about this, because it's very easy, and I see this happen quite a bit, that people talk about things, but it's those little bits of actions that all add up to rubbing off on children. And that's what Louise Chawler suggested when she did her research. Now, I could be wrong. It may not be 2007, but it's around that time, and it's in the Journal of Environmental Psychology. But she found that she interviewed loads and loads of people as adults who took environmental action, and she noted this common theme of one person in their life being a role model who disapproved of environmental destruction, who took little acts, commented on the beauty of the world around them and things like that. And I always looked at this and thought, these are so simple things. We could be that one person as educators that just say, isn't that a beautiful day today? Or thank goodness it's raining today, because those who say sunshine brings happiness have clearly never danced in the rain. And somebody who just models that joy and enthusiasm can be hugely influential in a drip, drip, drip effect. The other piece of research I was in the middle of typing was, it hasn't been translated into English, but Teresa, which is an environmental education organisation in the Czech Republic, they went back and looked at what programmes did they do that had the most effect or impact. And they went back through their entire history, interviewing people, and they found that the only ones that the adults remembered were ones that had been child initiated. So in other words, it wasn't the organisation saying, oh, we need to plant a tree because it's World Tree Day. It was the children saying, look, this is a bare patch, we need more trees here, we're going to plant them, which is quite interesting too. Just food for thought.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that, Julia. I mean, you're very much speaking to one of my other hats here in terms of the psychology of modelling behaviour, and that obviously as members of staff, but also peers as well, other young people modelling behaviours. It's quite interesting, because very often when I do RME events, one of the first things I say to people is, what is it that you bring to RME as a subject? Because often our own beliefs, our own values will influence how we address specific things. So, in terms of our own interaction with the natural world, that's will be an important aspect of how that then leads to young people. One thing that for me that's quite an important aspect in terms of the values is that whole idea about the golden rule. and pretty much every religion, every belief group has a version of the golden rule. And we often even some schools will have things like golden rule days in school. So how can we put the golden rule into practice in terms of the natural world? What could we do in an outdoor learning context to demonstrate this? Okay, any other comments you want to make? Ian, you've said something there about the concept of growth in Christian beliefs, parable of the mustard seed, and so on, and linking to nature and the natural world. Yes, I mean the links within and between religions and beliefs around the natural world are vast, and a great opportunity to explore that with learners. And right back to earlier on in the chat when people were talking about curiosity and question and problem solving and all of these kinds of things, great opportunities here with young people. Okay, Jen, if you move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so now we're looking at practices and traditions, and now we're in third level. Now, it's arguable that very often the kind of external signs and practices of religious belief are where we sometimes make a start at helping young people to understand religion and belief, to ensure that we make use of the outdoor learning context and learning. How could we think about how we might approach festivals, celebrations, and practices, either making use of the outdoors or, again, linking natural world aspects to religious practice? So, again, in this table, is there anything there that you're thinking, again, now there's an idea, or no, I don't agree with that at all, or whatever? Feel free to either raise your hand or put something in the chat. Juliet, you've come back to say emphasis on values and John Muir Awards, so some helpful discussion there and some links too. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example for this one because we're going to stop the recording and move into the discussion in a moment, as Mary's reminded me. Two things. We're about to come to the midwinter festivals, and across a range of religions, many of the aspects of celebration at this time of year are about light and darkness and good and evil and all of that kind of stuff. Think about how might you, sitting around a campfire affect your interactions with learners, bearing in mind health and safety, of course. How might they see things differently? Could you, for example, tell the story of the Ramayana, which is linked to the celebration of Diwali, around a small campfire outdoors? As I say, bearing in mind health and safety. But again, it's just a different way of thinking about how you might look at that. Katrina, birth, death, and rebirth. Yeah, the whole cycle of karma and samsara in Hinduism, and karma and rebirth in Buddhism as well. Great opportunities there to think about natural cycles in the natural world. And Lee, you come in about environmental impact of the commercialization of religious holidays. Now, again, that's a beliefs and values area of incredible exploration. I was once told that with primary teachers, you must never get into the discussion about Santa Claus. But I was thinking about how do we approach, for example, at Christmas, how do you approach the relationship between the bishop that was St. Nicholas and the commercial Santa Claus that we have at the moment, and where do we do that in the curriculum? So there's hopefully, when you go back and look at these, you will, again, I hope, be prompted to think, I could try that, or there's a series of questions that I could ask. Here are some learning contexts that I could use and to get young people thinking about outdoors, about the environment in terms of RME. And Julia, Nature of Yes. Julia, I could probably go on for Britain on that comment there. It's really interesting how many aspects of festivals, if you like, have origins which predate the religion to which they're currently attached, and that whole, nature worship. Christmas tree is probably the very good example of that one. So. Excellent comment, Julia. So, okay, if you move on to the next slide, please, Jen. Mary, are you wanting to open this out for discussion now? I will just give these sources of support first.
Yeah, sure. Mention these first, Joe. That would be grand.
Okay, that's fine. So, a couple of things, and Ian's very kindly pointed them out already. First of all, I did a starter paper quite a long time ago on religious moral education through outdoor learning. So the link for that is there. I'm sure you're probably all aware of things like the Interfaith Network Calendar of Religious Beliefs and religious festivals. And there is an outdoor learning and learning for sustainability wakelet, which Mary might want to say more about there.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah,
Okay.
I can really recommend Joe's paper to you. The first one, it's got kind of lots of kind of practical advice as well as sort of food for thought too. I suppose the Wakelet, if you haven't seen it, it's a kind of really good place to go to. There's lots of links to organisations, thought pieces, blogs, resources that I would really recommend. It's kind of not a one-stop shop, but I would recommend that you have a look there, and it'll open up a whole kind of world of resources if you haven't managed to see it there. And that probably kind of concludes it. Just on before we move into the discussion, Joe, I wanted to say a huge thanks from us to you for giving of your time this afternoon to share your thoughts and your expertise round about RME and how the links for outdoor learning can be created, can be forged, can be explored, can be questioned with children and young people. So thank you very much for your time for that. I am going to pause the recording and we'll move into a kind of discussion element. So if folk can